Hello, and welcome back. Last time I saw you, we were going to be fighting off countless waves of the flood with Winston waves, and funny enough, that's exactly what we're going to continue doing today. I'm not going to lie to you, things are a little bit rough. If you watched the last episode, you probably already know, but we lost 2 people at the end of last episode, and we currently have a double trouble raid coming right for us. You'll notice that there's 2 of the next wave on the screen right now, and that's because last episode, before I left the game, it was showing double trouble, and for some reason it's not now, but I do believe indeed that this is going to be a double trouble raid, as you can see with the amount of enemies. Either way though, something I do know for sure is that we need to fix our barbed wire and build a few new mini turrets for our protection, because this raid is not going to be a joke. We also need to repair our embrasures to ensure that they are not destroyed during the battle. If these embrasures were to fall while we're standing just on the inside of them, we are definitely going to lose quite a few of our people. With winter just around the corner, things are beginning to get quite cold as well, so we're going to start making some patch leather to go about making some dusters and hopefully some parkas in the very near future to keep everyone warm. But don't look now, for Raid 15 has arrived. As we had already guessed, this is not going to be a cakewalk, anything but, I might add. As you can see, there are many combat forms making up the majority of the wave, all carrying some very high-tech and very dangerous weapons. We would all rush to our defenses, but actually not to our embrasures. We were starting to tuck ourselves away in the little nooks and crannies of our defenses. Because of the combat forms carrying all those weapons, standing out by embrasures would be a death sentence. As the mass of enemies began to approach, our turrets began firing upon the large group. We were hoping that they would do the majority of the legwork for us this time around, but as you may notice, many of our turrets began exploding and falling to the sheer weight of enemy power. Though we did manage to kill many of them, they had even managed to make it to our armored doors, beginning to knock on them, trying to tear them down, of course, and also trying to use our embrasures against us. We would send the others inside our kitchen while leaving Axel out to continue firing at them, with him being our strongest member. Eventually, our turrets and our soldiers alike would finally defeat the combat forms. Now the only thing left were a handful of carriers who we would luckily end up killing before they even got near our embrasures. And with that, the wave was defeated. Our reward, we would end up choosing a delay in the next wave, delaying it by about 3 days or so. This would give us hopefully enough time to prep for its arrival and for future raids. The first thing we did was go around hunting down every single hound form that we came across, as well as infection forms, trying to make sure that the entire region was without any more flood. This was something that we couldn't achieve before this because, well, we just didn't have enough time to prep for the next raid, as well as going out and finishing off all the enemies that were being created. So thankfully we were able to do so, and we are safe for now. Since we also have the luxury of this extra time, we're building 2 new butchering tables. That way we can increase how many of these corpses that we are cutting up per day and destroying, turning into spores and meat. That way we don't have them reanimating the next time the next wave comes. Since we had so much time on our hands now, I thought it would be a great idea for us to go about increasing the quality of life for our civilians and soldiers here. That way we stop having so many mental breaks. We did this by improving the wooden flooring in our storage room and throughout our base, as well as mining out a proper dining room where we would actually have a table. Up until this point, we haven't had a table to eat at, and as you could imagine, everyone has been very pissed about that, and thus why we've had so many mental breaks, I feel. We also threw a tube television in there for their entertainment purposes. Here's hoping that helps everyone calm down just a little bit. We don't need anyone going into an insulting spree and pissing off the others, or going wandering out into the open and getting killed. I should have done this last video, and much earlier on, but I don't know, I was focused on the fighting, sorry. Speaking of which, we're going to use the last remaining components that we currently have to finish off yet another heavy-duty turret to help us out with the next wave. Thankfully, we also had plenty of steel in our reserves of storage to go about creating some more barbed wire, yet another layer that is going to be tapered off with a few spike traps to help help us out a little bit with finishing off Hound forms, as well as Infection forms, the majority of their forces, essentially. Once again, not only would we be facing the Flood forms, but we would also have yet another orbital bombardment going on in the region, causing massive forest fires. And obviously, as one might imagine, this made our battle with the initial forces all that much more dangerous, as we had a bunch of missiles or whatever was coming down upon our heads very close by, and there was always the risk of one falling right in our defensive area. However, it wasn't all bad though, since there were some pretty large forest fires when the carrier forms were pathing up towards our base. Some of them caught on fire and exploded, making it a little bit easier and more tolerable. For our reward, I would end up choosing a mini turret drop. Now, initially, I wanted to do this because I was thinking we would save on our steel as we planned on making more barbed wire and stuff, but now thinking back on it, I kinda wish I would have went with the components because we could have built these turrets and had more components to spare, but whatever. But regardless of my somewhat poor decision making, I decided to go ahead and install these turrets in our secondary defensive perimeter. Reason being, I think having them farther away from the first line of defense will make it harder for them to be destroyed by combat forms. And based on our next wave being double trouble and also packing quite a few combat forms, I think this might be the right decision. It was also due to this massive impending doom raid that was coming our way that I decided to start digging some trenches. This would actually give us a bit more cover at the cost, of course, of our attacking range, but hopefully it keeps us alive, and that's the main thing. That being said though, as the massive influx of Flood began to enter the area, I noticed that many of them were packing a lot of heat, i.e. being different types of rocket launchers, so getting into the trenches would probably be basically a death sentence. Their artillery that they have equipped, accompanied with the fact that there is an absolute shit ton of them coming right for us, yeah, we're gonna try to stay in our secondary defensive line and hope for the best, I think. The combat forms were some of the very first to begin approaching, and at first this was actually going quite well, as our turrets were taking out the majority of them before they could even get any rockets off. And our barbed wire was absolutely shredding their rotten flesh before they could get to our doors to try to destroy them. They would end up getting a rocket or two off though, destroying some of our smaller turrets. So, as you could imagine, we began trying to focus our fire on those Flood combat forms carrying the rockets, although many of our people were hiding so that they didn't die, so I don't know. Actually, you know what? I do know, and we are getting overwhelmed, not only by combat forms, but also by tank forms who are about to start knocking down doors and embrasures. I think it's time to retreat. Unfortunately though, Shorty would end up being shot in the back of the head when this was happening. Aronson was also heavily injured, so we would have to carry her into the kitchen. We could tend to the wounds of Aronson, but unfortunately there was no such hope for Shorty. As we were tending to our wounds, things were looking pretty dire, as our defenses were completely engulfed in an ocean of enemies. Our steel embrasures wouldn't hold out much longer, especially now that most of our heavy turrets have been destroyed. We would have to do something. Realistically, the only thing that we could do is to rush out and begin trying to fight them and fend them off as best that we could. Though, obviously, this was much easier said than done, especially once they had finally broken through our steel armored walls and embrasures and began making their way into our little courtyard. We mainly tried to focus on the infection forms, since if they got through to us, they would easily be able to infect us, but also because, of course, they can resurrect their fallen comrades. But as the situation dragged on, it was clear to me there was only one way out, through our orbital bombardment targeter. Thanks to the bombardment targeter, the majority of the Flood had been killed and or immobilized, and now it was time for us to begin finishing off what remained. Now that that's taken care of, for our reward, I decided to choose to have a colonist join us, especially since our numbers are much lower now with the recent death of Shorty. A gentleman by the name of Garrett would land a few miles away from the base and immediately get chased by the Flood hounds in the area, an issue that is all too frequent when fighting the the flood, unfortunately. But back home, we were fighting off many hounds ourselves in an attempt to try to get out to Garrett to keep him safe. Eventually, we would make our way towards him, killing off the rotten mongrels, quite literally, that were chasing him down. Needless to say, he was quite happy that he was safe and sound now and wasn't part of a galactic or intergalactic hive mind of space zombies. We had Arison take him inside to find some clothing before he starts to freeze to death out in these temperatures. It all seemed to be a little bit too much for our brute companion Lackey, who immediately had a mental break out here in the field and just started wandering around aimlessly. Now, unfortunately, regardless of everything that we've went through thus far, including that raid almost completely taking us out, we still have to prep for the very next one, so we started using up the last bits and bobs of our steel while also going out to mine some more to fix our embrasures and walls. Our mining efforts were constantly interrupted by all the flood in the area attempting to smash us into little pieces and then devour us, of course, so we would have to shoot and stab them as much as possible so we could just mine out some damn components. We were going to try to mine some of these components out right before the raid came because we had a new defense in mind. Not near as effective as what we've been using, but hopefully it might just save us. While we were collecting resources for these defenses though, we would also go ahead and give Shorty a proper burial. This gave us all some closure of her death, of course, and also would keep her from becoming a biomass piece to some cosmic horror. Finally though, hours before the next wave, we had finally collected enough components and steel to go about making ourselves some mounted turrets. First things first, the standard issue UNSC turrets are manual, meaning to use one, we're going to have someone stand behind it right in the heat of danger. And two, I would have built them sooner, but I didn't see them under the security tab because they have their own. My bad. Before the raid, I was trying to use our healer mech serum to go ahead and heal some of the wounds that Arison had. I didn't realize that these also only heal one wound per use, so that's not great. Even more so is the fact that the raid has finally arrived and is mostly comprised of combat forms wielding some very powerful plasma weaponry. As they began to approach, we began unloading our brand new UNSC turrets into them as much as we could, but we were getting absolutely pounded with plasma and other bullets, and it wasn't exactly going well. We were attempting to retreat inside into the kitchen away from all the danger and the explosions and the death, but even inside here, I'm afraid it won't be much longer before the death comes to find us. It was at this point that I realized this was our last wave. Now, we could tuck tail and try to let them kill us, or we could go out in a blaze of glory and do everything we could to kill as many of them as possible. Since we had plenty of unused chem fuel sitting in our storage room, we decided to put it to good use and set a trap. As they entered the base, we shot the chem fuel, igniting it, creating a gigantic blaze that would quickly consume our kitchen, burning all the wooden floorboards that we've been building throughout this video, and more importantly, setting all the filthy damn flood afire as well. We could hear their disgusting squeals as they were rushing in and out of the flaming base. It brought us great joy. Now, initially, it was getting very, very hot in the base, and I was thinking that I might be able to try to mine my way out, but the superheated air was definitely going to fry us before we'd have a chance to do that. And even if we did escape, there's not really anywhere that we could go that the flood wouldn't be. We couldn't take on what was left of them even if we wanted to. So it was time for us to make the ultimate sacrifice. And with that, my friends, we have officially lost, unfortunately. Although we made it much farther this time around than in our initial attempt, I suppose we could call it. I hope nobody's too upset that I'm getting completely creamed by all the flood and whatnot. This is more of a learning experience for me, and I'm just kind of practicing with Winston waves with an incredibly difficult enemy that adds a lot of new issues that I have to deal with, such as being able to resurrect their own dead on the map and infect people with a simple scratch to the skin and things like that, in the hopes that eventually we may end up doing a series, or we might do a super long video, or something, a 100 days video. I'm sure you guys might have some ideas on that, and I'm sure I will as well. But regardless, either way, I hope you have enjoyed, and I love you guys. I'll see you later. Goodbye.